All right, we're going to pick up with chapter 21, section 4, the progressive presidents. All right, the American presidents in the early 1900s really tried to promote progressive reform. Teddy Roosevelt's reforms try to balance business, consumers, laborers, while William Howard Taft, angered a lot of progressives with his cautious reforms. And Woodrow Wilson actually goes far reaching with his bank and antitrust reforms. So it starts with William McKinley. He wins re-election in 1900 and goes on a tour to celebrate his victory. All right, Buffalo, New York. This guy named Leo Leon Solagaz shot and kills him, making Vice President Teddy Roosevelt the new president. So Roosevelt really believes that business people, laborers, consumers should be balanced for the public good. So he puts a lot of new policies in place. He called his reform policy the square deal. Everybody should get a square shake at it. And he uses this policy to settle the 1902 coal miner strike, where the strike basically, the coal miners said, we want safer working conditions, we want better pay. And it threatened to leave the country without any heating fuel for the winter that was coming. So what he did was he threatened to take over the mines unless they agreed to arbitration, which was basically just this formal way of settling disputes with the strikers. And his tactics ultimately worked, and the strike was averted. A lot of regulation of big business was influenced by Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. Roosevelt really urges Congress to enact meat inspection laws, and so Congress passes the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906, which prohibited the manufacture, sale, transport of mislabeled or contaminated food and drink. It's the precursor to the FDA, obviously. Roosevelt then gets Congress to regulate railroad shipping rates, and he was the first president to actually successfully use the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up a monopoly. The public largely supported the expansion of federal regulatory powers because they saw that left in only human hands that there were going to be problems. He also strongly supported conservation, which is the protection of natural resources. In fact, he was the first president to consider it an important national priority. He was a big hunter. He was a big outdoorsman. Some preservationists wanted to protect nature and save its beauty. People like John Muir made it a top priority to lobby Congress, particularly for the Yosemite National Park. Other preservationists wanted to make sure the nation used its natural resources efficiently, like Gifford Pinchot. He was the first leader of what was the newly formed Forest Service, and he valued the forests for the resources that they provided. Roosevelt also added 150 million acres of public land to the Forest Service. He doubled the number of national parks. He established 18 national monuments and started 51 bird sanctuaries to try and prevent the move into the natural beauty of the land by people. Now, William Howard Taft was Secretary of War for Roosevelt. He wins election in 1908 over William Jennings Bryan. He was a lot more cautious than Roosevelt towards reform and regulation, and but he was a little more cautious, he also opposed socialism and favored business regulation. He wanted to regulate, but not in a way that was socialism. So progressives were really disappointed in Taft's approach, because most of the public supported very strict regulation of big business. Taft ended up signing the Payne-Aldrich tariff, and that raised prices for consumers, which was obviously opposed by a lot of progressives. Taft runs for re-election on the Republican ticket. Roosevelt, who was mad at Taft for all of his ideas, formed what was known as the Progressive Party. The Progressive Party then gets nicknamed the Bull Moose Party. All right. Woodrow Wilson runs as a Democrat and then gets elected by a huge margin because Roosevelt and Taft split the Republican vote. Eugene V. Debs ran on the straight Socialist Party idea. So again, Taft and Roosevelt split the Republican vote. Wilson wins by a huge margin. So Wilson speaks at his inauguration. It's terribly cold. He wants to prove that he's strong. And that he understands the terrible working conditions and social conditions of working families. And so he had two major goals. One was tariff revision and banking reform. So, through the 16th Amendment, he introduces what becomes known as the modern income tax, all right, which is only possible because of the 16th Amendment, which was ratified in 1913. He addresses banking reform with the Federal Reserve Act, creating a national banking system, and it allowed the federal government to regulate the national economy better. He also pushed for laws to regulate big business, specifically the Clayton Antitrust Act, 1914, which strengthened a lot of laws against the monopolies. The Federal Trade Commission, which was created in 1914, had the power to both investigate and punish unfair trade practices. That concludes Section 4.